The village of Nthanda was never truly quiet. By day, it pulsed with the steady rhythm of pounding grain, the chatter of women at the river, and the laughter of children chasing goats through the dust. By night, it hummed with the lull of crickets and the low murmur of elders trading stories beneath the baobab tree. But now, a different kind of silence reigned, one thick with suspicion, sharpened by fear. People no longer spoke freely when she walked past. Conversations broke like clay pots dashed against stone, leaving only fragments in the air. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men turned their faces away. And though the wind still moved through the tall grass, though the drums still echoed on festival nights, there was always that unease, as if the village itself held its breath when she appeared. They said her words poisoned the air. The elders repeated it often with the finality of law. Her tongue carries shadows. Her voice calls the storm. Her words poison the air. The younger ones whispered it like a charm, spitting into the dust afterward to ward off her presence. Some even claimed their dreams soured if she so much as greeted them in passing. Her name was Ayanda, 24 years old. A woman whose beauty was not loud but arresting, carried in the calm strength of her eyes, the proud line of her posture, the grace with which she moved. She spoke rarely not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned early that her words carried weight, and in a village that feared what it did not understand, weight was dangerous. Her silence unsettled them even more than her voice. To many she was a reminder of things they could not explain. The sudden lightning that struck the old granary, the sickness that stole 3 children in a single moon, the drought that turned the riverbed to cracked clay. None of these tragedies had anything to do with her, yet suspicion stuck to her like smoke to cloth. And behind that suspicion burned a cruelty that had been waiting for a spark. Ayanda bore it all with quiet defiance. She moved through the market with her basket balanced on her head, ignoring the mutters. She fetched water from the river though women shifted away as if her shadow might taint the pot. She knelt at her mother's grave in the evenings, whispering prayers no one dared to listen to. Her silence, her endurance, her refusal to break, these things only deepened the unease. And at the center of the unease was one woman, her stepmother. It was the stepmother's voice that dripped poison into the ears of the council. It was she who stirred the whispers into accusations, fanning the embers of fear into fire. To her, Ayanda was not only a reminder of a dead wife she could never replace, but also a threat, a younger woman whose kindness and strength drew quiet admiration even from those who claimed to despise her. The village followed the stepmother's lead as they often did when fear outweighed reason. And so Ayanda became a shadow in her own home, a stranger among her own people, her every word treated as an omen. The air in Nthanda was heavy now, charged with suspicion. Children no longer laughed freely at dusk. Women no longer sang while grinding millet. Every cough, every dry season, every broken marriage seemed to circle back to the same name, Ayanda. And in the hushed spaces of the night, when the owls called and the dogs whimpered, villagers muttered the same warning under their breath. Her words poisoned the air. Long before the whispers grew sharp enough to wound, Ayanda had been loved. When she was a child, people spoke of her beauty in the way one speaks of a morning sun, warm, gentle, a thing that promised light. Her wisdom seemed older than her years, her kindness a well that never ran dry. She helped the old women grind millet, carried firewood for mothers heavy with children, and soothed crying infants with her quiet songs. To the eyes of the village she should have been a blessing. But blessings often turn bitter when envy festers. When Ayanda's mother died, the balance shifted. Her father remarried quickly, bringing another woman into their compound. The new wife came with her own fire, sharp-tongued, restless, always reaching for more than she had. She expected the respect of a queen, but found instead that the people's eyes still lingered on Ayanda, on the girl who carried herself with grace, whose silence was never weakness but strength. It began as small things easily ignored. A sneer when Ayanda entered the room. A harsh word for a chore done perfectly. A pot knocked over by accident when Ayanda was near. The stepmother's bitterness was like water dripping onto stone, slow, patient, inevitable in its erosion. Then came the harvest that failed. The rains had been late, the sun unyielding. Fields that should have been green with maize were brown with dust. Hunger spread through the huts, and with hunger came fear. Villagers began to search for a reason, for someone to blame. Misfortune, they believed, did not fall from the sky without cause. It was always carried by human hands, spoken by human tongues. And the stepmother, watching, waiting, saw her chance. "She is too quiet," she murmured, not loudly, but just enough for others to overhear. "Her silence hides something." Does she not sit by her mother's grave each night, whispering words no one can understand? The whispers began to root. When a child fell sick with fever, the mother said, Ayanda passed near him that morning. When lightning struck a hut at the edge of the village, the owner swore he had seen Ayanda's shadow stretch unnaturally long in the storm. Every sorrow, every accident, every unexplained sound in the night was pinned upon her. The stepmother fed these fires with skill. She told the women at the river, her tongue speaks with spirits. She calls to them in the dark. She told the men at the council, misfortune walks where she walks. Do we not see it? Rumors are like seeds. Once scattered, they take root in every crack. Soon, even those who had once admired Ayanda began to glance at her with unease. The gifts of food she once received dwindled. Friends avoided her hut. The laughter that used to greet her became silence, or worse, mocking smiles. She bore it all with the same quiet grace, but each false word was another stone on her shoulders. Her stepmother thrived in the shadows of this growing fear. The more the village turned against Ayanda, the higher she stood in their eyes. She was no longer just a wife. She became the voice of warning, the one who saw the truth when others were blind. And so, her bitterness transformed into power. Yet Ayanda endured. Though her days grew lonelier, she still knelt by her mother's grave, still sang softly to the children who dared approach her, still fetched water without complaint. It was this resilience that enraged her stepmother most of all, that no matter how heavy the chains of rumor became, Ayanda did not bend. But fear, once awakened, is never satisfied with whispers alone. The stepmother's words had seeded doubt, and doubt demanded proof. The village, restless under its hunger and sorrow, began to murmur of tests, of judgments, of ways to unmask a curse if it truly wore human skin. And all the while, her stepmother smiled in the shadows, her words dripping venom. Her tongue speaks with spirits. The baobab tree stood at the heart of the village like an ancient guardian, its roots clawing into the earth, its branches stretching like arms that had watched over generations. Beneath its shade, the elders gathered, their faces heavy with worry, their voices low and uncertain. Around them, villagers pressed close, whispering, waiting for the fate of one young woman to be decided. Ayanda stood at the edge of the gathering, her head bowed. The morning sun caught the faint shimmer of her braided hair, but her eyes were shadowed. She said nothing. She had long learned that words, no matter how gentle, would only be twisted. The council began with mutters, with nervous coughs and shifting feet. Then her stepmother stepped forward. She moved like smoke, slithering, curling, filling every space. Her voice, sharp as a blade, cut through the murmurs. Elders, she said, spreading her arms as though in grief. How long will we endure her poison? Every day her tongue stirs storms. Every word she breathes brings sickness, hunger, and fear. Have we not seen the crops die? Have we not buried our children? Are we blind? A ripple moved through the crowd. Mothers clutched their babies tighter. Men looked away, shame mixing with unease. One elder cleared his throat. The girl has done no open harm. We cannot punish a child for shadows. But the stepmother's eyes blazed. Shadows? Did the lightning not strike near her hut? Did she not sing when the fevers came? Her words poison the air itself. If she speaks with spirits, then silence her. Seal her lips and the spirits will starve. Her demand struck like a drumbeat. Silence spread. Another elder, old and weary, leaned upon his staff. His voice was brittle. We cannot ignore the fear of the people. If she is innocent, then sealing her lips will do no harm. If guilty, we will be spared further curses. Murmurs of agreement grew. The villagers nodded, some reluctantly, some eagerly. Fear is a heavy weight and fear seeks a sacrifice. Ayanda lifted her eyes then. For the first time since the council began, she met their gaze. Her stare was calm, unwavering, as though she already knew what their verdict would be. The quiet strength in her eyes unsettled some, but it did not stop what was to come. Her stepmother pressed on, her voice like fire feeding dry grass. Seal her lips. Let her words die inside her. Only then will we know peace. The head elder, tallest of them all, stepped forward. His skin was lined like the bark of the baobab, his hands shaking as he raised them for silence. The murmurs hushed. His eyes swept the crowd, then settled on Ayanda. Young one, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of decision, the people fear your tongue. They believe it calls storms and sickness. To keep the peace we decree, your lips shall be sewn shut. You will speak no more. Gasps broke the air. Some women covered their mouths in horror, others nodded with grim relief. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed. The stepmother's lips curled into a smile she tried to hide, but Ayanda saw it. And though her heart pounded in her chest, she did not cry out. She stood tall, her silence more powerful than any denial could have been. One by one the elders struck their staffs into the earth, sealing the verdict. The sound echoed like thunder beneath the tree. It was decided. The crowd slowly dispersed, whispers trailing into the dusty air. Her lips will be sealed. The curse will end. At last the spirits will be quiet. But above them, the branches of the ancient baobab shivered though no wind passed through. The sky, far on the horizon, darkened with the faintest trace of storm clouds. And Ayanda, silent still, felt a fire awaken deep inside her chest. The evening air was heavy, thick with dust and dread. The village square filled with bodies pressed close together, every eye drawn to the center where Ayanda stood. Her wrists were bound with rope, her shoulders pinned by two strong men. She did not fight, but her stillness carried a weight more frightening than any struggle. A hush spread as the head elder stepped forward. In his wrinkled hand gleamed a small iron needle, its point catching the fading light. A thin thread dangled from it, black, coarse and smelling faintly of soot. To most it was just a tool. Tonight it was an instrument of silence. The stepmother lingered close, her face twisted with satisfaction. Her eyes sparkled as though the cruelty unfolding was a feast laid before her. She leaned toward the crowd and whispered, "Watch closely. The poison will be sealed." At a signal, the men forced Ayanda to her knees. Her body trembled, though her gaze stayed forward, steady. The crowd began to murmur, their voices weaving into a low chant. Some chanted to drown out their guilt, others to convince themselves this was justice. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts, eyes wide with a terror they did not yet understand. The elder raised the needle. For a moment, his hand shook, hesitation flickering in his gaze. But the stepmother's stare pressed into him like a blade. He pressed the needle to Ayanda's lip. She winced as the cold metal pierced flesh. A hot sting shot through her face. Tears welled in her eyes but did not fall. She tried to breathe deeply but every pull of the thread burned. The second stitch dragged her lip tight against the first, sealing away words she had never been allowed to defend. The chanting grew louder, rhythmic, like drums without instruments. "Silence her. Silence her. Silence her." Ayanda's tears finally slipped free, carving wet tracks down her cheeks. She wanted to cry out, to beg, to curse, but only a strangled hum escaped, muffled and pitiful. Her pain became the crowd's proof. She was dangerous. She was unclean. She was guilty. The needle worked back and forth, piercing, pulling, binding. Each stitch robbed her of breath, her lips swelling with pain. Blood mixed with the coarse thread, dark droplets staining her chin. The stepmother's smile widened with every stitch, her chest rising with a wicked triumph. At the final knot, the elder tied the thread with hands that would not stop trembling. He stepped back, his eyes refusing to meet Ayanda's. It was done. Her mouth was sealed shut. The crowd roared approval. Some clapped, others chanted her silence like a victory. But amid their noise, a strange heaviness settled in the air. The sky had dimmed faster than the sun should allow, the horizon streaked with unnatural shadows. Ayanda lifted her head slowly. Her eyes, wet, swollen but burning, swept over them all. Though her lips could not part, her gaze screamed louder than any curse. Mothers drew their children closer, shivering. A few villagers lowered their eyes, uneasy as if they had seen something they should not have. The stepmother stepped forward, raising her hands. "It is done. No more curses, no more storms. The village is free." Cheers answered her. But above them, the clouds thickened, heavy with unshed rain. The air smelled of iron and ash, as though the sky itself had watched the cruelty unfold. Ayanda's silence was no defeat. It was a promise. The hut was dark, built of mud walls that trapped the heavy dampness of the storm outside. Only a faint crack in the roof let a sliver of moonlight fall across the earthen floor, where she lay curled like a wounded animal. Her lips throbbed with each beat of her heart, stitches pulling at tender flesh, burning with salt and blood. She could taste iron every time she swallowed. The cruel threads had sealed her voice, but they could not cage the storm building inside her. Her hands trembled as she touched her mouth, feeling the knots biting into her skin. Each movement sent sparks of pain up her face, yet she refused to cry out, not that she could. Silent tears slid down her cheeks, hot as fire. Hunger clawed at her belly, thirst burned her throat, and still she remained, her back pressed to the cold wall of the hut. The villagers had abandoned her to the night, certain that without her words she was powerless. Outside the storm began to stir. Winds whistled through the village, rattling doors and shaking thatched roofs. Owls screeched in the trees, their eerie calls cutting through the dark. Dogs barked wildly, chains clinking as though they too sensed something unnatural stirring. She sat upright, heart pounding, listening. Each rumble of thunder felt as if it answered her thoughts, echoing her pain back to the sky. She remembered her stepmother's gloating smile as the thread pierced her flesh, the way the villagers chanted for silence, for punishment. Rage boiled in her chest, so sharp it cut through the hunger and the agony. But beneath the rage was sorrow, deep, endless sorrow that no needle could sew shut. She pressed her forehead against the wall and closed her eyes, whispering prayers inside her soul. She could not form words with her mouth, but her spirit spoke, clear and strong. And in that silence she began to feel something. The air thickened around her, heavy with power. Her body trembled, not from weakness but from a strange energy seeping into her bones. She lifted her head, eyes catching the faint beam of moonlight, and for a moment, it seemed to glow brighter upon her face. Her breath grew steady, calmer, as if the storm outside had entered her chest. Lightning split the sky, flashing through the cracks of the hut, illuminating her form for an instant. In that blinding white light she looked transformed, no longer broken, no longer pitiful, but fierce, defiant, unyielding. The stitches held her lips closed, yet in her heart she knew she was not silent. The storm heard her. The night heard her. Her ancestors heard her. She lay back on the floor, the pounding of the rain on the roof like a drumbeat of war. Each drop was a voice. Each rumble of thunder was an answer. The villagers had caged her in silence, but in the darkness of that hut, her spirit was learning to roar. By the time sleep finally stole her away, the storm outside was no longer wild, it was watchful, circling the village as though waiting for her command. The night pressed heavy upon the village, the storm circling like a restless beast. Inside the hut, she lay on the earthen floor, every part of her body aching. The stitches pulled tight against her skin, raw and swollen, yet her spirit no longer felt bound. A strange warmth stirred inside her chest, steady and insistent, as though someone unseen had placed a hand over her heart. At first it came as a hum. Faint, broken, trembling like the wings of a moth caught in the dark. Her lips did not part, could not, but the sound pushed through the gaps of her breath. It was low, fragile, yet carried something unearthly. She froze, frightened of herself, but the hum did not stop. It swelled, soft and steady, filling the small hut like a secret song. Then the hum became words. Her lips remained sealed, yet a whisper threaded itself into the air, strange and hollow, echoing like wind sighing through the branches of 1,000 trees. It did not hurt her wounds. The stitches held, but the voice did not come from her mouth. It came from somewhere deeper, from the marrow of her bones, from the place where sorrow and strength had tangled together. The hut trembled. The thatched roof creaked, the mud walls shivered, as though the very earth was listening. She sat upright, eyes wide, as the whispers swirled around her like smoke. At first she thought she was imagining it, but then she heard them, other voices. They rose gently, one by one, layered upon her own. Voices of women long gone, ancestors whose names were buried in dust and memory. Their tones were firm, resonant, carrying the cadence of ritual and power. They spoke not in words she could fully understand, but in rhythms that sank into her blood like a drumbeat. Each whisper joined the next, weaving together until the air shook with sound. Her body swayed with the rhythm. She pressed her palms against the floor, trembling as the whispers climbed higher, louder. Her eyes burned with tears, not of pain but of recognition. She was not alone. She had never been alone. Outside the villagers stirred. A farmer walking past her hut stopped in his tracks. His head tilted, ears straining. There, in the hush of the storm, he heard it, soft whispers slipping through the cracks of the mud walls. He frowned, stepping closer, but when he pressed his ear to the wall, the voices seemed to dart away, circling him like a wind with no source. His skin prickled. He backed away quickly, muttering a prayer under his breath. Soon others heard it. Women fetching water from jars, children half asleep in their mothers' arms, men sharpening spears by the dying fires. All paused, stiffening, their faces pale in the moonlight. Whispers. Low, ghostly murmurs drifting across the village paths though no one walked them. Words without lips. Echoes without bodies. Some villagers clutched their charms and fled indoors. Others knelt on the ground, pressing their ears against the earth, as if the soil itself was speaking. Back inside the hut, she pressed her hands against her chest, gasping softly. The whispers pulsed like a heartbeat. She felt the ancestors close, so close she could almost see them, shadows flickering in the corners of the hut, faces glowing faintly with starlight. They leaned near her, their voices steady, guiding, reassuring. One placed a hand upon her head. Another lifted her chin as though telling her, "Do not bow. Rise." The walls rattled harder now. Dust fell from the roof, scattering across her shoulders. The storm outside roared in answer, lightning streaking the sky. Thunder rolled across the land, yet within her hut, the whispers cut sharper than thunder, filling every space with their strange, unnatural harmony. And still her stepmother did not sleep. In her hut across the village, she sat awake, eyes wide, body shivering as she too heard the whispers on the wind. Her hands trembled over her mouth, for though she knew she had demanded silence, silence had not been given. What lived in that hut now was no longer the stepdaughter she despised, it was something else, something vast, something she could not control. By midnight no one in the village slept. The whispers drifted through dreams, slipped under doors and lingered at the edge of every ear. And though some villagers tried to drown them out with prayers and chants, nothing silenced the sound. It grew, stretched, spread until the whole village seemed to breathe with it. Inside her hut, the young woman closed her eyes, letting the voices wash over her. Her pain was still there, her wounds still raw, but her spirit was no longer broken. She was becoming something more. The whispers had begun and the night itself was listening. The storm that had been circling the horizon all evening finally broke with fury. Thunder cracked so loud that the children buried their faces in their mothers' laps. Rain fell in sudden bursts, hammering the thatched roofs, running down the packed clay walls, turning the earth into dark mud. Inside her hut, she sat upright, eyes wide, as the voices of the ancestors still lingered around her like a low chant. Her chest rose and fell heavily. Each breath carried a hum that was no longer her own. Then it happened. Lightning split the sky, and a bolt struck the earth only a few paces from her hut. The ground shook violently, and sparks scattered into the air like 1,000 tiny suns. The villagers screamed. Some ran into their homes, others threw themselves face first into the dirt, wailing prayers. But their eyes kept darting to her hut, to the flicker of strange light that pulsed from within. She felt it too. The energy surged through her bones, a hot current that wrapped itself around her heart and spine. Her skin glistened with sweat, but it was more than sweat, it was as though her flesh itself was lit from within. A faint glow seeped out from beneath her skin, soft and shimmering, like moonlight trapped in a jar. The stitches on her lips tightened, pulling at her raw flesh. Then before her eyes the blackened threads began to smoke. They smoldered, glowing red at the edges as if touched by unseen fire. Yet they did not burn away. The heat did not scorch her skin. Instead, the smoldering threads trembled, holding her lips closed but quivering as if resisting some invisible force. Her hands shook. She touched her face gently, fingers trembling over the heated threads, but no pain flared. Instead she felt strength, something vast, untouchable, crawling beneath her skin like fire searching for escape. From outside the villagers gasped. Shadows gathered near the hut's entrance, their eyes wide with terror. Through the cracks in the walls they saw it clearly, her faintly glowing figure, light pulsing from within her chest. One man stumbled backward and whispered, "The silence cannot hold her." Another cried out, "The storm itself answers her." The stepmother, who had come to watch from the shadows, staggered backward, clutching her wrapper tightly around her shoulders. Her lips moved in frantic prayers, but her eyes betrayed her fear. She had demanded her stepdaughter's silence. She had sworn that stitches and shame would end her voice forever. But now, as the hut shook with every crash of thunder, the silence seemed weaker than ever. Another bolt of lightning struck, this time directly on the roof of the hut. Sparks flew, straw caught, then extinguished as the rain poured harder. But the hut did not collapse. Instead, a blinding flash illuminated the young woman inside. Her body arched backward, arms stretched wide as if the storm itself had entered her. The glow inside her grew brighter, enough to make the villagers outside stumble back in horror. Children cried out. Elders muttered that no ordinary girl could survive such things. "This is not the work of the living," one said with a shaking voice. "The ancestors have risen in her." Inside she pressed her palms into the earth, her breath heavy and loud. Her head tilted back, her eyes rolled upward, glowing faintly white in the darkness. The voices of the ancestors swelled louder, joining the thunder outside, until hut and storm seemed to sing in the same rhythm. And in that moment, though her lips remained sewn, the villagers swore they heard her voice whispering in the wind. Not words, not curses, but power. A sound that rattled their bones and froze their blood. The silence was breaking. And nothing would ever hold her again. Midnight had settled like a heavy blanket over the village, yet no one slept. The storm raged on, lightning slicing through the dark sky, thunder rattling the earth, and rain hammering the roofs in relentless rhythm. Inside her small hut, she sat cross-legged, the faint glow of her body casting shadows on the walls. Her stitched lips throbbed, but the whispers that had begun earlier now grew stronger, more insistent, threading through the very air of the hut. Suddenly the chains that bound the door rattled violently. The wooden bar splintered under the force of an unseen pressure. Villagers outside froze, their hearts pounding, hands gripping torches that shook in their grasp. The chains snapped entirely, clattering to the ground like falling bones. She rose, her movements fluid, calm, almost regal. Lips still sewn shut, yet her voice, low, strange and echoing, poured into the storm. The hum became whispers, the whispers became words that no one could understand, yet all could feel. It was not a voice carried by air alone, it was a presence, a vibration that made the earth beneath her feet tremble. The mud walls of the hut groaned as if bowing to the force of her spirit. Rain lashed through broken cracks, yet did not dampen her glow. The threads on her lips smoldered faintly, red-hot but unbroken, resisting fire while carrying her silent command. Outside, the villagers began to feel it. The ground shook underfoot. Dogs howled and chickens scattered into the mud, their feathers slick with rain. Men dropped torches in panic, their flames hissing as they touched wet earth. Women clutched their children, eyes wide with terror. Elderly men and women whispered prayers, though they did not know who, or what, they were praying to. She stepped out of the hut slowly, deliberately. Each footfall was measured, but the earth itself seemed to pulse beneath her. Lightning flashed, illuminating her faintly glowing figure, and for a moment, all the villagers could see her clearly. A young woman, small in stature, yet impossible to ignore, radiating a light that was not of the sun, not of fire, but of something ancient, something divine. Her whispers grew louder now, filling the space between trees, winding around the huts, slipping under doors and curling through every ear in the village. It was as though the very storm had taken her voice and amplified it. Even the wind seemed to bend toward her, carrying her whispers in long, twisting streams of sound. A cow fell to its knees, ears pinned, mooing as if terrified of something it could not see. Dogs cowered, tails tucked, whimpering. Chickens flapped and scattered, wings slapping the mud. The earth quaked beneath the villagers' feet, faint at first, then strong enough to knock men off balance. Their torches sputtered, flames dancing wildly, and many fell to their knees, covering their faces. Her stepmother appeared at the edge of the square, drawn by curiosity and dread. She froze, seeing the glow radiating from Ianda. The sight stole her breath. She had demanded silence, she had called for punishment, yet the girl she sought to crush now commanded the storm. The woman could not speak, could not move, could only watch as power she did not understand gathered around the daughter she had tried to destroy. Ianda's whispers continued, rising and falling like a tide. The air was thick, vibrating with a resonance that made the villagers' teeth chatter and their hearts pound in unison. Some cried out, some fainted, some simply fell silent, eyes fixed on the glowing figure at the center of the storm. Lightning struck again, closer this time, splitting a tree near the village square. The bark smoldered but did not ignite. Every flash illuminated Ianda's calm face, her eyes bright, yet quiet, observing her surroundings. She did not scream, she did not shout, yet the effect of her presence was undeniable. The villagers realized then, the silence they had imposed was meaningless. Chains, stitches, fear, all had failed. She was no longer just Ianda, the girl they had tried to punish. She had become something far greater, a living force of spirit and nature intertwined. And in the midst of the storm, with whispers carried in every gust of wind and every drop of rain, the village knew its reckoning had begun. The storm raged around the village, yet in its center, a strange calm settled. Ianda stood in the open square, her faint glow cutting through the sheets of rain. The whispers that had carried her through the night now pulsed like a heartbeat, resonating in the bones of every villager who dared to look at her. Her stepmother emerged from the shadows, trembling so violently that her feet barely touched the ground. She opened her mouth, perhaps to plead, perhaps to curse, but no sound came. Fear had already stolen her voice. She stared at Ianda, her eyes wide, shimmering with tears and terror, the years of bitterness and cruelty collapsing upon her all at once. Ianda's gaze swept the crowd, piercing, unwavering. Her lips were still sewn shut, Yet the air vibrated with her whispered power. It was not a normal whisper. It was a sound that lived in the mind rather than the ears, a single word that carried weight far beyond speech, beyond human comprehension. The villagers held their breath as the stepmother's knees buckled. Ayanda stepped closer, the glow around her intensifying with every heartbeat. One word escaped, not from her lips but from somewhere deeper, somewhere older. The stepmother's body froze, then collapsed to the muddy ground. Her eyes rolled back, mouth open in silent scream, and when she tried to cry out, no sound came. The voice that had spread lies, that had sown fear and cruelty, was stolen forever. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Some fell to their knees, some buried their faces in their hands, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The elders, those who had judged her, felt their ears ring, the echoes of guilt pounding relentlessly in their heads. The whispers of Ayanda's spirit brushed against their minds like invisible fingers, reminding them of every injustice, every accusation, every stitch of cruelty they had sanctioned. They had thought punishment could silence her. They had thought fear could bend her. But now, standing before the glowing girl whose lips could not move yet whose power filled the storm, they understood that human cruelty had no dominion over what was righteous, over what was just. The villagers began to murmur, some in awe, some in terror. "She is not human," whispered one woman, clutching her child. "She is chosen by the spirits," said another, voice quivering. Even the men who had been the loudest in their support of the stepmother, bowed their heads, faces pale, uncertain of their place in the world now. Ayanda remained calm. Her eyes scanned the square, resting briefly on each person who had doubted her. She did not speak, yet the whispers of the storm carried her judgment clearly. No one could deny it. No one could escape it. The wind seemed to bend around her, the rain fell more softly at her feet, as if the storm itself acknowledged her dominion. The stepmother lay motionless, her power taken, her voice gone forever. Even the elders, though alive, carried the weight of guilt as though it were a tangible chain around their necks. They had sentenced an innocent girl, thinking themselves just. Now they knew their error, and the lesson seared itself into their bones. Ayanda raised her head, glowing faintly beneath the storm clouds. Though she had not moved her lips, the whispers continued, filling the ears and minds of all who remained. The village felt the balance shift, a new order settling in like the first calm after a tempest. Justice had been done, not in screams or blood, but in the quiet, undeniable force of spirit. The storm, which had howled and raged for hours, seemed to pause, listening. Lightning flickered across the sky, striking distant trees harmlessly, as if acknowledging the power that had been awakened. And in that moment, every villager, every child, every elder, knew that Ayanda was no longer a girl to be punished. She was a force, eternal, and the whispers of her spirit would never be silenced again. The storm had spent its fury, but the air still trembled with energy. Clouds rolled slowly away, leaving the village soaked, mud-slicked, and trembling. Lightning flashes still arced across the horizon, illuminating the square in sudden, sharp bursts. The villagers emerged cautiously from their homes, eyes wide, mouths agape, whispering in awe and fear. At the center stood Ayanda. Her faint glow had not faded with the night, it lingered, soft and steady as though she carried the storm within her. Her stitched lips did not move, yet her presence spoke louder than any shout. The ground beneath her feet was firm, commanding, as if the earth itself bowed to her. Some villagers fell to their knees, heads pressed to the wet mud. "Chosen," they whispered, voices trembling, "she is chosen by the spirits." Mothers clutched their children, offering them blessings and murmured prayers, fearful and reverent at once. Fathers crossed themselves and lowered their spears, recognizing in her a force far greater than their understanding. Others, however, could not look upon her without dread. They ran, shoving past friends and family, calling her cursed, possessed, a bringer of storms. Their terror was raw, instinctive, for the girl they had once scorned now held the weight of nature itself. The wind seemed to chase them, the clouds flickering like angry eyes above. Her eyes scanned the crowd, calm and piercing. Though her lips remained sewn, her whispers carried with the wind. The villagers felt her voice in their bones, in the trembling of their hearts, in the flash of lightning that danced across the village. One word reached them all: remember. She whispered it again, clearer this time, as if the storm itself lent her strength. The sky remembers lies. The words did not simply float in the air. They struck deep, sinking into the minds of the stepmother, the elders, the men who had once demanded punishment. Their faces paled, eyes widening with understanding. The guilt, the fear, the recognition of wrongs committed, All became unbearable in that moment. Lightning arced across the sky, crashing into a distant tree with a deafening roar. The villagers gasped. Some fell further to the ground, crossing themselves, muttering prayers they had not believed in before. Others raised their hands, pointing as though the heavens themselves had echoed Ayanda's voice. The stepmother knelt, trembling violently, unable to speak. Her bitterness, her cruelty, her lies, all were laid bare before the storm and the girl she had tried to destroy. She had once sought to control, to punish, to silence, yet now she was powerless, caught in awe and fear of the very child she had tormented. The elders gathered together, arguing in low, hurried whispers. "She must be honored," one said, voice trembling. "She must be banished," countered another, fear shaking every word. But even in their disagreement, none dared step close to her. They felt the power radiating from her presence, the undeniable force of justice intertwined with nature itself. Birds circled above the square, unusually calm, their wings cutting the air in measured patterns. Even the animals that had fled now paused, sensing the shift in the world around them. The storm had left its mark, not only on the land but on every living thing in the village. Ayanda remained still, her glow steady, eyes luminous beneath the thinning clouds. Though her lips were sewn, the villagers understood her message perfectly. She did not need words, the sky itself had spoken for her. The rain-soaked earth seemed to hum, echoing the whispers that had carried through the night. Finally, a hush fell over the village. The storm's rage had subsided, but its lessons remained. Some villagers bowed lower, heads pressed into the mud, offering reverence to the girl who had endured, who had awakened the spirits themselves. Others retreated, trembling, eyes fixed on her, hearts pounding with fear and respect. And above them all, lightning struck once more, jagged and brilliant, as if in agreement with her words. The sky remembers lies. The truth had been spoken, justice had been delivered, and the village would never forget. In that dawning hour, Ayanda was no longer simply a girl with stitched lips. She was a force, a living testament, and her whispers, carried by wind, storm, and memory, would linger in the hearts of all who witnessed her awakening. Years had passed since the night the storm had answered her voice, since the girl with sewn lips had risen from the shadows to command the elements and awaken the spirits. Yet in the village, her story lived on, whispered from generation to generation, carried on the crackling tongues of elders gathered around the fire. Children huddled close, their eyes wide, faces glowing in the orange flicker of the flames. They leaned forward eagerly, craving the thrill and terror of the tale, yet too frightened to breathe too loudly. The elders spoke slowly, drawing out each word, letting it sink like rain into the minds of the listeners. Ayanda, they said, was no ordinary girl. Though her lips were sewn, she spoke to the sky, and the sky listened. The hut where she had been imprisoned, where her lips had been cruelly stitched and her spirit tested, had become a place of reverence. No one dared step upon its threshold lightly. It had been repaired after the storm, but the mud walls remained marked with faint scorchings and cracks. The villagers left offerings there, small bowls of water, handfuls of millet, trinkets carved from bone and wood. Some claimed the wind carried her whispers still, soft and haunting, threading through the cracks in the walls. During storms the village changed. The air grew heavy, thick with electricity and expectation. Children huddled indoors, clutching blankets and each other, while adults moved cautiously, eyes scanning the clouds. The wind sometimes carried sounds that were not thunder nor the crash of rain, low melodic murmurs that seemed almost human. Some villagers insisted they were hearing Ayanda herself, a voice carried through time and spirit, reminding them that silence could not truly bind what was just and powerful. Elders told the story differently to different audiences. To children it was a tale of courage, a warning not to underestimate the quiet or the meek. Even the smallest voice can shake the heavens, they said. To adults, it was a lesson in justice and fear, a reminder that cruelty toward the innocent never goes unpunished. Some listened and bowed their heads in respect. Others whispered apologies for wrongs committed long ago. The hut itself became sacred ground, surrounded by small stones etched with symbols of protection and memory. Flowers grew along its edges, but never in abundance, as if the earth itself guarded the place. During storms, the wind would whip around the structure with a strength that seemed to test the courage of any who approached. And when the villagers paused, listening, some claimed that faint whispers floated on the gusts, echoing the words she had once sent to the sky, warnings, prayers, and the soft insistence that truth could not be buried. One evening, a young boy crept close to the hut, curious despite the tales. He pressed his ear to the doorframe, heart pounding. The wind was rising, whistling through the trees, rattling the roof. And then, faint but unmistakable, he heard it, a soft, almost musical whisper that made the hair on his arms stand on end. He staggered back, eyes wide, and ran to the elders by the fire. "I heard her," he gasped. "The girl, the one with the sewn lips, she speaks." The elders nodded solemnly, not surprised. "Yes," one whispered, voice low and steady. "Even closed lips can speak to the sky. Never silence the truth, for it will find a way to be heard." The children shivered, hiding closer to their parents, imagining the girl standing there, luminous, speaking through the wind, the storm, and the years that had passed. Some villagers claimed that on nights when lightning split the clouds, a faint glow could be seen flickering within the hut, dancing along the walls as if Ianda herself were still present. Others insisted they heard a hum in the air, gentle and persistent, that carried both warning and comfort. No one could say for certain whether it was real or imagined, but everyone agreed that the place was charged with power, sacred and untouchable. The legend shaped the village in subtle ways. Children learned respect for the quiet, the meek, and the wronged. Adults remembered that cruelty bore consequences, that lies were always remembered, and that injustice could awaken forces far beyond human reckoning. And when storms came, as they inevitably did, the villagers listened, not just to the thunder, not just to the rain, but for the whispers, soft and insistent, reminding them of Ianda and the night she commanded the sky. In the flickering firelight, the elders closed their tale with a warning and a promise. Never silence the truth, for even closed lips can speak to the sky. The children shivered, the wind carried the words through the village, and somewhere just beyond the reach of sight, the faint glow of her spirit seemed to shimmer once more, eternal and unbroken.